What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. This week another exciting tier list, this time looking at the Stoichea nation. Radiant's not here this week, but I'm still joined with Deli and Silver.
Hey guys.
Hi.
So the tier list is still built up with a meta, relevant, fun, support and irrelevant tier. I don't think I have to go over what those mean, they're pretty straightforward, so let's just jump straight into the decks. The first one we're looking at is Magnolia Elder, which is one of the original Stoichea decks. Well, it's the set 4 version that's recently been supported in Divine Set 1, and I see Deli already put it in fun, so you have something to say about this?
I just put it there as a placeholder.
I see.
I did think it
Yeah,
might actually fit there.
I do think it fits there, actually, yeah.
I personally think it belongs higher, because my testing of it wasn't that great, but the potential is still there, since it's a deck that does not really use its own resources. The entire 6 attack play is free, so it can just allocate its B and soul to other things. But it's hard to build a deck that hits over numbers, because basically most decks you see running around are just a lot of draw power, and that does not really work in the current meta, I feel.
I also feel like Magnolia Elder can struggle a little bit with forming like a decent hand to defend itself. And I feel like it can like struggle a little bit against control as well.
No, I think you make a very good point, since it runs a lot of grade 3s who don't have shield value. That might just be a bit of its downfall. Although with the new cards, since you are capable of reviving 2 cards, because it's a grade 4, I feel like it could just go into a different direction if built correctly.
For now, I feel like it's just doing what it likes to do, and like comfortably, but I'm not really expecting to see this at tournaments.
Next up, we'll take a look at Magnolia Masques. You think is a little better?
I feel like the promo really helped it out a lot.
The Counter Charge promo is definitely a big part of why this deck would be good, but also the fact that it's one of the only decks that has recurring rearguards that also immediately get power means that it's a really interesting deck to play around with.
Yeah, the scaling is pretty shocking, especially when they start using the persona right to the back row guy.
That's personally a build I haven't tested with even. I generally focused on the Yolanda plays where you just get a lot of draw power and recur them again when you rewrite next turn. But those rearguards on the back row are all immediately already 28k, I believe. So they didn't even need the persona right power, so if they would get persona right on top of that, that's really big. And with the new Searcher to get your Magnolias consistently to your hand, I feel like the Divine Set 1 version would actually be a lot better than what we already have. So I think relevant is definitely correct. Maybe in the right hands it could be meta, but that's hard to say without even more testing. Zorga, the bane of my existence. This deck immediately...
What's your favorite deck?
Yeah, it immediately goes into meta. It's the strongest thing I've faced if everything goes right. It's one of the only decks I feel in Stoichea that also filters really, really hard. And if you let it go first and it gets into that mask turn, it already swings for really good numbers. That being said, in my hands it's not that great because of a lot of orders. I tend to brick on it, but I've seen other people do really consistently well with it, so it's definitely something you will see at big tournaments and is worthy of its position in meta, I feel.
And the fact that it can brick is kind of a reason for me to say it might just be relevant, because I've seen Zorga brick, and when it bricks hard, as in you don't do anything anymore. That would be my only reason. The fact that it can brick, and when it bricks very, very hard, makes me think it's either relevant than meta, because I've seen when Zorga players brick and they absolutely cannot do anything anymore. When they only like find one of their roaming prison dragons, or if they simply cannot get orders to hand in some convoluted way, they really, really start to struggle.
I do agree with that idea. I believe that the big issue with Zorga is that if you just brick, you don't really play the game because base Zorga is not strong enough to sustain the deck. The nice thing though is that you have access to ways to bounce PGs to hand, so you could actually stall a bit and hope to get to a win con, but the scaling of standard is pretty high, so I feel like a bricking Zorga is a bit of a coin toss. If everything goes right, the game is probably yours. If something goes terribly wrong, you're more than likely just losing the game.
Yeah, I would say for me personally, because it can brick hard, I would either put it on top of relevant, because a deck that's not that consistent is not that meta to me.
Well, it does have a lot of filters, so I feel like it has a higher chance of seeing defensive, so it has a better play into decks like Shiranui, for example, who are meta. It's pretty fast. It can also aggro on the early turns already. So it does have a lot of tools to combat what's good in the meta game. So I feel like Zorga would be one of the safer picks if you look at the entirety of Stoichea.
What do you think, Deli?
Right, talking about the Shiranui matchup, it'll be very interesting that oftentimes they can afford to only have their roaming prison dragons on the field. And when you dominate a roaming prison dragon only swings for 14, it's a very favorable number for the Zorga player. So in that sense, that's very nice. And not finding their pieces, I think an issue I see more often with Zorga that it runs out of pieces. Like,
Oh yeah, that's also a possibility when the game goes on too long.
Yeah, so if you don't have an order anymore in your hand, and I have a way to get an order back, you're stranded and you just have to vanilla swing with your 5k roaming prison dragons. And that's where I feel in the deck can fall flat. But as a good Zorga player, you obviously play around that and make sure you actually have enough resources to continue playing.
I think that's a very good point. Definitely if you done your first grade 3 turn, you're going into a Persona right turn. The nice thing though is that you still have your Vanguard skill that can remove Zorga, so you can get an order back to your hand. So if you play smart, you can definitely keep going once you got your setup, but you're right, you have to play correctly to not run out of steam. That's a very good take on how Zorga can be good and can also be run just really bad.
Yeah, it's a deck that needs a certain amount of control over your plays and like discipline in a way.
That kind of finishes Zorga off very well. I think it still deserves its meta position, saying all of that.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll love finishing off Zorga. Moving on, let's take a look at the big dragon thing. What's this? Flagburg. Yeah, it's Flagburg. I don't even know where this guy belongs.
Is this set 3, if I remember correctly?
Yeah.
I played that card so much to the point of exhaustion. Like, I just don't like playing him anymore because I played it too much. And sadly, I can't put him anywhere above need supports. Like, I would even put him into irrelevance from the standpoint that he already has gotten a lot of support after we set 11. And none of the support really does anything to help the deck out, so... The win con it has with the guard restrict is still really strong. It has draw power and removal, which you can only hope for in most decks. But the fact that you have to pay a lot of costs to get your restanders off, and that a defensive on your first grade 3 turn totally stops your entire turn, just means that he's much worse at what he does than some of the other decks. Like, he just needs a mask unit to become what he needs to be.
I think we're way past mask units. I would just say like maybe a new Flagburg is in order.
Definitely a way to force a persona right, so you really get the value of those small restanders that just swing for 10k.
That's also a point. I've faced this deck a lot since we're training partners most of the time. And when you do not get a persona right, you really fall flat on your face. Especially indeed with like with the defensives, like it really starts to hurt to play at that point.
And you can't really undercommit either because you still need those 3 attacks to get the draw. And then one more thing I want to mention about it is that it's one of the decks that actually wants to go second, because a lot of its skills are locked behind your opponent being grade 3s, the restanders that being. And so it's really bad in games where you're facing a stride deck because, well, they're gonna force you to go first and you're just gonna sit there and hope that you hit, but you're not doing all that much.
I would like consider maybe putting it in fun because I do feel like it can work, but I don't know. To me, you are the expert on this deck, so if you say irrelevant for me, I can agree with that.
I'd put him at the bottom of need support because I feel like a really good card would just push him into relevancy again. But I can't put him into fun anymore because I feel like he's just has so many bad matchups where he's just not gonna do all that much anymore. So I can't see myself winning locals with it anymore either. So that's I think a big indicator that does not belong in fun for me.
Okay, then I would put it in irrelevant because it had its chance to get support.
I don't like this deck, like just generally. when it came out, I feel like it was very strong. I kept losing to it, and that infuriated me. And it's kind of sad seeing it fall from grace in this way, because it didn't get any real upgrades. And that's the big thing to me. It's kind of just the same deck still that it was back then.
Yeah, every update it gets, it's like always the same.
Yeah, or it's not good enough to be included.
Yeah. It never gets anything like that does something new or something interesting. It just always gets like some convoluted way to get like an awkward restand.
Right, it can do 6 attacks, I believe, in total. 7 if you do some very convoluted stuff. So that's a really high number, but then there's Magnolia, who also just does that and does not pay for it at all. So I feel like, sure, it's guard restrict as a payoff, but it's still not that great. If your opponent knows what you're doing, you don't get power. Well, he gets plus 10k, but 10k is not enough to pressure your opponent hard enough to put 3 cards down anyway.
And the sad part about that 10k is that it's only on like the 5th attack, actually.
Yep.
Like if you cannot reach your 5th attack, you're swinging for 13 without booster.
Which, crazily enough, is sometimes the better play, because you then can put crits on one of your restanders and actually get 2 swings with pressure. But yeah, that's the reason I feel like the deck really fell off. Like, it does not do what it needs to do anymore. I think this is one of the more exciting decks to talk about. So we tested it recently with the new promo, and it actually is pretty amazing. So it's one of the few decks that can do 4 attacks on turn 2, which immediately is a really strong thing to do. And then if you see a trigger on that turn 2, you pretty much are swinging for, I believe, 20k and then for 30k. But if your opponent checks a defensive, you can also just make it 1 column and go for numbers like 50k. So it's really strong going first on that grade 2 turn, and then on grade 3 we can now immediately ride up into the new Rorowa, which means we get a crit on Vanguards, we get another 5k on that Momoke, and yeah, the deck can just steamroll. It has more draw power, more defensives now. It really did a lot to make the deck where it is.
That's just disgusting.
It is disgusting. And the crazy thing about it is that you still have that grade 3. You can superior call mid-battle, which is something you can only do if your opponent's at grade 3, luckily. But your opponent can't know if your last attack is gonna be the Radalina grade 2 swing. And so you can just surprise them with an extra swing that's 70k or something. So yeah, the deck is really nasty. It does kind of want to check triggers to be really effective, because I think if you don't check triggers, your numbers are fine, obviously, but they're a bit less. But he lost his glass cannon status to me, and that's why I kind of want to put him at top of relevant or bottom of meta right now.
I would put him bottom of meta. He sounds threatening as hell.
Yeah, he's definitely a deck I would consider bringing to a BSF, or if we had BCS right now, to a BCS. He also is one of the few decks that can run both of the cycle cards, so the Soul Blast cycle card and the Energy cycle card. Since he refunds his own soul with his engine pieces, and then he does not use energy, obviously, so you get a lot of draw power now, which is something you did not have in the past.
Yeah, it was really scared to go up against. And I was playing a terrible deck, but that's, here and there. The fact that you can now go into the new Rorowa on your first turn 3 is honestly terrifying. It gets a crit, gives your token another +5. It's really strong. Especially going first, I feel. And as far as I remember, only the grade 3 Radalina has a grade 3 restriction. So you can basically just do everything you want and just go all out in your offensive plays.
And you still have tokens to sack for next turn, so you still have defensive options. You get draws if you sack those tokens, so you're plussing so much more than in the past. So I really like this deck. It does kind of run out of steam, because the issue is you always kind of want to ride with the new promo card instead of just persona riding, actually, because you want to use the skill to call your tokens to your field again. If you have to persona ride, you still call 2 tokens, but then you have to sack off those tokens for the Momoke power, and so that kind of clashes. So you do need a high consistency on seeing that one promo card, but it's not terrible if you're going first anyway. So it's a really good card, that just pushes your boundaries going first, and it's not like your floor is getting lower. So the deck can do its base power thing where it just rushes your opponent down, but it can do it even better now. So that's why I think it's definitely meta contender.
I think we'll go from one meta contender to the next here. Talking about Lianorn's multiple varieties.
Best deck in the game, baby.
Well, the way you play her is like all three of the versions together, right?
Yeah. It's the version I personally enjoy the most because it's really good going first, really good going second. I have toyed with the idea of going into the just base Lianorn and then Vivace, because I feel like there are a couple of interesting cards like Resonance Dragon where you can play into that play and get a lot of value also from just any trigger you check, because you get 2 restanding rearguards with that power. But I feel like going second, just having access to Lianorn Masque means that you can get back the pressure you lose from going second really well. She also works much better with the new support cards we got. So there's this Grade 2 cards, I believe it is. It's a promo as well, sadly. It looks like every deck that's good has promos. Soul Blast 1, when it restands, and if your power of your Vanguard is 33k or greater, it gets a draw and plus 5k. And that card just synergizes so well with Mask, because Mask gives you extra soul, and then also just has 2 of those in the front row and restands them, which means you get a lot of extra hand, which you wouldn't have on base Lianorn. And I feel like that's a really easy way to survive long enough to go into Vivace, and because Vivace does 6 attacks, including 2 Vanguard swings, generally that's just enough to finish the game. So yeah, Lianorn has some crazy tools. It has a lot of draw power. It does not have a high trigger chance per se because it does not filter, but it's still a really, really strong deck with an actual finisher with a win condition.
It's really, really good.
Yeah, I think it's a very accurate way of describing the deck.
Maybe one more thing I just thought of. You have early game as well with the... I forgot the name of the card with the scissors.
Rosarium Fairy.
Yes, Rosarium Fairy. She can kill off one of your units to get 2 plant tokens, which means you just get a lot of attacks in the early game as well, which helps you totally get to a point where you can easily finish the game. So yeah, she has all of the tools to... She is successful. She's probably one of the few decks that tops the most from the Stoichea nation.
Now let's take a look at the encounter card, the name of Maelstrom.
I feel like need support is a very accurate placement.
Yeah, Maelstrom is a letdown. It's sad to say, but he definitely deserves to be in the need support category. I feel like the deck could be really good, but it kind of has the same flaws as Flagburg. So it's in that spot where everything costs CB and you don't really have those resources, or if you do have those resources, you have them only for 1 turn. And then you need the Persona right, because without the Persona right, you don't have power. They did print a promo for it that gives it a 15k attacker that swaps, and that attacker scales with the amount of orders you have in the order zone, so it's really cool. It also works really well with inlet pools because you can put him into soul. He got a 5th wave attacker that gets power by himself, so they gave him a couple of cool cards, but he really just needs something like a Glory Maelstrom that puts something else into the deck that gives power to the front row in a blanket way, like a Persona Ride, to really get value from all the swapping you want to do, because most of the swapping is just sometimes not even worth it, because if your opponents check that defensive, you just rather boost your own attack so you at least hit. So yeah, Maelstrom is really cool, has potential, but he can be higher than need support.
I feel like it really struggled by the fact, like I feel like they messed up with the fact that Flagburg already existed, and they really wanted to make sure that Maelstrom is like different in some kind of way, while honestly they should have just tried to merge their support a little bit together, in my opinion.
Well, I feel like they did kind of try to merge it by making it so he works with any tier dragon unit, because inlet pools existing and being a tier dragon unit, so they saw that like the inlet pool stonks going up and were like, yes, we'll print another deck. But yeah, besides that, I feel like it's just a thing where they... What's his name? Tidal Assault? The version they printed in Standard is terrible. There's nothing good I can say about the card. Wheel Assault having a cost is also just really bad. If they just made it Maelstrom restricted but did not give it a cost like it has in V, like where it's just free to swap something, at least then you'll have an easy way to get your 4 attacks. But right now you're just trying to get through all your resource management to get that 4th attack, getting no real payoff other than 1 retire and 1 draw. Like, Maelstrom himself is just a worse version of Flagburg right now in Standard. So we just need a better Vanguard. The support can just work with the new version, and then it's probably a much better deck. But as it stands right now, it just needs a good support card that gives power everywhere. And yeah, so they're both a bit tight, I suppose, for the position that they would be in. So I suppose if we put Flagburg into Irrelevant, we should put Maelstrom in Irrelevant as well. But I did actually get a good placement with him at locals sometimes, so I feel like Maelstrom has more chance to become better in the future. So I guess he deserves a spot and needs support.
He also has had less opportunity to actually get supports.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's from set 8, and we're already hitting set 14, I believe. Well, set 1 again, but...
Maelstrom needs his glory as much as Azel needs his Latino. Yeah, there's too many Azel at this point. I was gonna say Raven-Haired.
Maelstrom definitely leads his glory. That's the best way you could put it. Make it like Overlord, where you just have to write a new one from the right deck and have a grade 1 or grade 2 that puts the old Maelstrom in Soul and then gives an effect. That's just the way I would like to play it, because then I don't have to play this version of Maelstrom anymore.
Alright, I think we can move on to Granfia.
Granfia is super scary. Yeah, it's super scary. It does not have hand size though. That's his big flaw, but I feel like it's kind of, well, for early game, I would say it's tied with Rorowa, but as in finishing power, Rorowa is probably a bit better because it's more versatile. It can survive a bit longer, but Granfia has so much pressure. It's insane. You can commit 1 or 2 cards in the early game and have a full field just by calling plant tokens. And then when you go to your grade 3 turn, your plant token in the back row, if it can be removed, it's easily a Vanguard swing for 70k, and then both rearguard swings also going for 70k. And then you restand one of the rearguards and it also goes for 70k. So yeah, the deck has some insane scaling, some insane power, but it needs a little bit more draw power. And the draw power it has is also only during battle phase, if I remember correctly, when a promo it got. So it's in this weird spot where it will benefit from more draw power. And I feel like we could get it maybe generically in the future, but if they decide to support him again, that could really be good. Because it also just uses Rosarium Fairy as a win condition, and it uses it even better than Lianorn does, so yeah. The deck has the tools to be amazing, it just needs the draw power to sustain it.
That's a good way of putting it. Like, if you don't draw into your Rosarium Fairies, the deck kind of doesn't do as much as you want it to do. A lot of really cool and good plays with some of the generic stuff, like the Grade 3 Rotting Usurp Dragon. Like, that was very good inclusion for this deck. It's just a free body to then retire for the Rosarium Fairy. So it's a deck that can push your opponent really hard, but it's pretty much just a glass cannon.
But I think it's the perfect glass cannon deck we have right now. Like, it's literally the embodiment of that, since Rorowa kind of moved away from that idea of being glass cannon, since he has more sustain now. Whereas Granfia really can't choose, he has to play glass cannon, because there's no other way he can survive in the meta.
Mythiarq, tell us all about it. I know you've been playing it more than I would like to.
So I've been playing this a lot lately, and it's just because I have a lot of fun with the deck. It's not a good deck by any means, but it's really, I guess, the embodiment of a fun deck. So the cool thing about Mythiarq is that it has a really, really good Vanguard skill, where when it's placed, you check top 7 and you call a card, and then if you have 5 or more cards on your field, you let your opponent discard 1 card. The cool thing about all of this is that I've had games where I just had 1 card left in, I did have no cards left in hand, and I top deck my Persona right, and then you still get to superior call something, and then that card gives you a draw, and you can also call that one, and it's one of those decks that can come back from a weird situation or weird spot and still get some value out of it. It also has ways to get a lot of power on a single restander, which is a promo that still has to release in English, but should be released by the time of Divine Set 1. And so I probably would not put it at the top of fun. I'd say it's either in need support or the bottom of fun. But once it releases, I will definitely be trying to take this to locals, because I believe that on a good day, it could definitely win, because it has some really, really interesting skills. It's special. It's a bit of a weird deck. It has some weird control vibes to it that don't really synergize with what it really wants to do, because it's really just an aggro deck that wants to punch your opponent as hard as it can, and combine that with the ability to make your opponent discard a card. So it has these small kind of control things where it says your opponent can intercept or can't stand with a unit. But those effects really do not matter. It's more so one of the restanders that says when your Vanguard attacks, Soul Blast 1 restand, and then the ability of the Vanguard to bounce a card and call a card, and then one of the Great Ones in the back row that gives power every time something's called. So because that Great One exists, every play you make just makes your units in the front row grow that much in power, so you can swing for massive attacks on that first Grade 3 turn. And so it's a really cool strategy, but it needs some kind of support to make it really relevant. I feel as long as something as simple as a named PG would probably already put it on the map. But I doubt that we'll get something like that.
That is indeed doubtful. I've always felt like since the beginning that this deck came out that it was always very confused on what it wanted to do. Like, it always felt like they just took 5 clans and mashed them together and they were hoping for the best.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I feel like the promo they printed for it is really the thing that solidifies the strategy a bit as being an aggressive deck. A deck that just wants to do 5 attacks, has good consistency, and wants to swarm the board with cheap pieces, so to say. And then punish your opponent if they don't clear your board. But yeah, it still needs a little bit more to streamline that strategy, or like give it indeed a strategy, a game plan to work towards.
Yeah, I would personally put it in need support, considering that promo is literally all they've gotten since release, I think.
Let's hope Divine Set 3 brings some support, because I believe it's a manga deck, so when the other manga decks are getting support, they should never they should take the chance to give this one support.
It's high time. Like, they really just dropped the deck out there and just said good luck.
But if we put it into need support, it's definitely the top of need support, because it's the deck I feel is closest to being where it needs to be in terms of what the Vanguard skill does. It's amazing. Like, you literally cannot power creep that Vanguard right now with anything else that would help the deck more than this one does. Being able to superior call anything from the top of your deck and then on attack bounce and superior call something again. Those are 2 really, really strong abilities. So yeah, I think Mythiarq has the potential to be a really great deck, but it needs a little bit more to push it towards that great status.
Alright, then we go to a deck that is Delhi's specialty.
I have a long and very flavorful history with this card at this point. I tried like 10 different builds for making this deck work. Many of them didn't work, and eventually I just found something that just works, and like it felt really nice. This is in my eyes, this is a really toolboxy deck that can be really good because it has freestanding, has 4 attacks, which is average. It has a triple drive, which is really nice. Can go up to 4 drives with the correct orders. But besides that, I feel like it lacks identity in the fact that the whole binding different orders, there's starting to get more orders that are really nice. But there's also a lot of them that are just completely worthless to play. To the point where you're trying to put more orders in your deck, and then you're like, wait, no, the deck is doing worse than it was before. So it's like a struggle with itself sometimes on like how you want to play the deck. It's a resource managey deck as well. It's difficult for me to explain it, but like getting 3 bodies to retire can sometimes be a real hassle. And managing your amount of plant tokens you have, it's just sometimes more work than it's worth it. That being said, I also think this is one of the decks I have the most fun with. It's so incredibly fun to just swing Vanguard and say Quadrive and look at your opponent and just smile at them and be like, hey, I'll check 2 crits, don't worry about it, take the Vanguard. So I feel like it's a very fun deck. It can do things. I'd argue it might even be in need support just because it doesn't have any dedicated support to itself. But the base concept of it works in a way that is playable. That's why I would advocate for putting it in fun.
I think you're definitely correct in saying that it belongs in fun. Although it kind of looks weird there, since you definitely took it to PCS, if I remember correctly, and I remember you testing a lot with it, and the thing you said about the orders is definitely right. So you have a really cool streamlined build for it, where it just works really, really well. So I feel like it's almost relevant. Like, you definitely could win something with it. Like, it's weird putting it low, while it's actually really good when it goes off.
Yeah, but when it doesn't go off, you just don't do anything. Like okay, so I took this to BCS, right? I'll go into it a bit. And I've had games where my opponent died before they ever reached grade 3. And I've had games where I didn't do anything the entire game. And because of that, like, it's such a big spectrum of how well this deck can perform that I don't want to put it higher than fun right now, especially with decks getting a lot better since then. We've gotten like Shiranui and stuff, which I think would completely dumpster fire this deck into the ground. It just doesn't feel right for me to put it higher than fun at the moment. If it got like one dedicated piece of support, it just needs the one, I would probably put it in relevant. But for now, for me, it's a fun deck that I don't see anybody ever taking serious or like being like, oh yeah, this deck, oh I need to be careful, I need to watch out. No, you just PG the Vanguard and then you're fine. Let's go over and look at the semen of our little adventure.
Christianos!
Oh, that I would call that card the bane of your existence.
It forced me to build such bad decks, but yeah. Christianos is so cool. It's actually just Grand Blue in standards. People, it's kind of worth Zorga. Let's just talk about this for 1 second. Zorga Nadir has a better version of the skill.
Fair, yeah.
That's the one issue, right? Because Christianos still wants to run orders because you want to have a win condition, because the deck does not have a win condition. So you run this order that gives a crit and plus 15k power, because you have 15 cards in drop or more, right? But that just means that you're gonna run a lot of pieces to get those orders to hand, then get pieces on board that get a lot of power from those orders. And currently it has, I believe, 2 support cards, at least one in Divine Set 1, which is the Restander. The Restander is really good, but still needs a Persona Right copy in Soul. So it's turn 4, and yeah, the deck is just super clunky, but the fact that it mills and revives and searches the Persona Right, like the baseline of its skills are really good. So I feel like it has future potential, but they just need to make it 1 turn faster. So it has a dedicated support card that puts a copy of itself in Soul and gives you that restand immediately on turn 3. But I doubt they'll give us that, because this is just a start deck boss and it'll just be pretty in my binder.
If they don't give you that, I feel like they should give you some kind of way to like maybe cycle your triggers back. Or cycle anything back, because the amount of time you mill your PGs, your Persona Rides, and all of your triggers is just not funny anymore.
Yep, that's a very big point. And sure, you can revive some stuff and then do cool things with Ghost Chase and bounce them back to hand, but like, that's all just really old, outdated stuff we did in Zorga, and he definitely needs his own cards that do that have good text on them, don't cost a lot, and just give you good value. Like, even something that just goes to your hand if it's milled and your Vanguard is Christianos, something as simple as that would be really strong. So I hope they just give us some good cards to support the quick start decks, because this guy has a lot of potential. It just goes untapped as long as we don't get good support cards.
Let's move over to the most recent Divine deck, Butterfly
Oh,
Veleno.
it's my girl. Yeah, so this girl is now the reason that I am going to become a Stoicheia player, because she is absolutely amazing. This girl is an absolute brick wall. If you get your pieces right, people are literally never going to be able to kill you, and they just run out of steam and you can just kill them. So the way she works is she is, by definition, a blitz order wall deck, and she buffs up your entire field like Battle Sisters. It sounds a little bit one-dimensional, and truth be told, sometimes it can be, but the fact is it works. Because there's also an order called Overcoming the Unnatural Death, which can constantly cycle back all of your blitz orders from your drop zone back to hand. Every time you also use a blitz order, she lets you draw and countercharge. Okay, she lets you countercharge once, but the draw is every single time. So effectively, if you just keep seeing your right pieces, you're not going to die. And it's honestly just really, really funny at some point. The only thing I would say is she can struggle going second, which is weird actually, because most of her strong skills are grade 3 locked. But you actually want to go first, because then you have incentive to use your orders and get draws and pieces already. If you're going second, you don't want to use all your orders, because then you're not getting as much advantage out of them.
Right, I think it's a really cool deck indeed. They finally built a reason into Standard to use Blitz orders by giving us the ability to use more than one per turn. And I think that's super cool that Stoicheia is the one to get such an ability. I actually haven't played the deck myself, so it's cool to see your insight into it. And yeah, we talked about the new support it's getting even in set 2, and that just shows us that they're not done with giving this girl good support.
Oh no.
she's getting so much better.
The minute I saw the set 2 stuff, it was immediately like, yes, I picked the right deck for Stoicheia.
Yeah,
obviously for this tier list, we're only talking about tier 1, but even that, it already can do 5 attacks in 1 turn, and it's not even that costly. It costs you 2 counterblasts, but if you just guard with a Blitz order the turn after, it's only 1 counterblast anymore. So that's also just a nice thing. You're not going to run out of steam, because as long as you use a Blitz order, you get resources back, and with resources, you can just keep playing.
Yep, and because decks like Shiranui have a lot of small pokes at the start of their attack cycle, you can just Blitz order those, get the value from them, and you've guarded them without losing any cards in your hand, so you're pretty much ready to guard their bigger attacks. So I think the way the deck is designed is really cool, and it just counters a lot of the multi-attack strategies, which are pretty dangerous. Exactly. I don't know how it plays into the 3-attack big swing decks, although I don't believe there's too many of those anymore. Most decks are 4 swings at least, but yeah, I don't know how it plays into big columns.
Honestly, still pretty good, because you can just Blitz order and then bunk it with all the triggers you're probably still going to have in hand, because this deck also filters a lot. You're going to use more cards to guard because, of course, but then you still draw and it's not multi-attack anymore, so you're still most of the time fine. It's also worth mentioning that the grade 1 Fiore, she's able to add Blitz orders and Veleno pieces to your hand. But that also means she can add Persona Rights to your hand, and that she can add the Elementaria Sanctitude to your hand. So yeah, the deck is just really, really amazing right now. You really have a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I think we're ready to move on to the Dragon Tree Wretch. The Tree of Destruction, yeah, that's where it belongs perfectly. It's irrelevant. Radiant talked me into telling you people that the Stoicheia version is viable, but it's really not. So Vartex has an order that could theoretically add a card from your deck to your hand, but there's no good way to get your Roaming Prison Dragons to drop, so realistically you're not having a good early game unless you just forcibly guard with, I guess, a grade 3, so it's in your drop, and the next turn you activate the order to add a card from top 5 to your hand. But that being said, I don't really feel like the Stoicheia version has anything good to offer. Sure, the overtrigger is pretty strong, it's a front trigger, so it helps you with the things you restand being big, but it's nothing like the Dragon Empire version, where you could actually say it's an actual version of the deck that could work. So no, for me, the Vortex is irrelevant. and definitely does not belong any higher.
I have nothing to add to this. I hate the Dragon Tree boy.
Gila is a card that exists in this video game that we play. That's all I
And we
will say.
unfortunately have to talk about.
He was a cool concept, that's all I can say.
That's how I feel.
I can't believe
Yep.
the anime actually made us think this thing was threatening.
Yep. And you can play it in every nation, except you don't want to. Bugs.
The last
Right.
deck with Stoicheia is our little bug snack of a... It's a deck alright.
I think of the three of us, I'm the only one to never have faced it, so I'm taking you guys' word for it.
It's a bunch of vanillas, which is really cool. But no, it's a super aggro deck. I feel like what it wants to do, it does really well. The 45 deck change did kind of nerf it. And so... at the top, sure. But it's one of those strategies that if everything goes right for you, you can probably just win the game because, well, your aggro just outscales whatever your opponent's gonna do. But it's not the kind of deck that you're gonna bring to a tournament and feel really safe playing because you're just playing some RNG kind of deck. That's, I think, the way you should be looking at it.
Yeah, I think it's a roulette deck that if you sack, you can win, and if you don't, you don't win.
We
has a
talked a
good green
bit
to game.
about it. Right, yeah. And it runs the token guy, the mushrooms, so you can put bodies on the board and just swing a lot. And sure, if you don't have the right hand to survive its turn, it just wins, because it has a lot of pressure, it has restanding Vanguard. But if you survive that turn, generally their hand size is not gonna be that big. Since they run orders, they also will probably have a little bit less shield value in hand. So if you can keep up with their pressure, or like get rid of their field, you probably are gonna have a really good time against them.
I would realistically put it around here, like here-ish, but it's a bug snack.
It does not deserve support. I kind of still want to put it at the bottom of relevant, because you kind of want to have seen it in action to know if you face it, like, what am I going to expect? Although I feel like it's not like you're gonna be able to change much about your fate at that point. But yeah, since we put Magnolia in fun, I feel like it should be somewhere around there too. Yeah, so
like his deck was very threatening when it came out in JP, and then we got it like a set or two later, and it just got kind of power crept by then. It definitely is power crept by now, so I think fun is a good spot for it.
Definitely in a meta where there's a lot of stride decks who have more cards, I'd say, in the early game. Decks like Luard, who can also just throw their hand away to guard stuff, means I think that it just has more bad matchups right now, and also the less consistency because of the 45 card deck change. I feel like that's one of the big things that just nerfed this deck as well. So I don't even know what you would put in the last slots, like the energy cycle card probably. That's
you could
probably the best thing it can run, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we made a pretty cool tier list.
I'll wrap up our Stoicheia tier list. I do think Bug Snacks is the best snack you can ever have. Let us know down below what you guys think about Stoicheia, what you guys think about our opinions. And we will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.
Ciao.
Bye.